inverted, however you like to slice that. Okay, so that's kind of a brief overview of clubs that we're working with right now without spilling all the beans. We're in talks with teams overseas. Our model is ramping up to be a really good one for that type of thing. And yet there's a little bit more reliance on our ability now, instead of scouting out of MLS territories. So for example, in the old model, if I was scouting for Portland Timbers, I can't go up to Seattle and grab a 14-year-old kid and bring him down to Portland. He's in their territory. So, but that changes when you can look at all the MLS Development Academy players, 2 tiers of which will exist. When we go and look at those players, we can be putting them in our database, and that could be data that's going to be useful to international clubs. Same thing if we find a player that's in a territory of MLS, but he's not being developed by that MLS team, but a USL team would love to have him. That's another opportunity. And so, and then we even have clients in that PDL, League One space of USL and also NISA. And everybody, if you're asking, well, what's going on right now? Well, we have a lot of film, we have a lot of video, and we have Zoom calls with our entire staff, not all at once every time. So it might be, okay, we're getting the 16 youth scouts together for one call once per week, and we're going to cover, the United States U20s, and we'll just work through our list and make sure that our depth chart is up to date. And granted, those are notional because, obviously the 3rd or 4th best right wing might be a really good fullback in 2 years. So you don't get too hung up on who you rate as the best left wing, because it might be a right-footed kid like Ulysses. But you do make sure that you get the top players on the board. And then you can figure out, who's a 10 and who's a 9.5 and have those discussions. But as long as you know the player and gather the data, then you're doing a good job. So that's kind of a quick rundown on who we're scouting for and just some general interface information. I want to show you guys a example of some research, because it's really something that you need to do to have a good targeting model. Back in 2013, it was actually right before the draft, so it would be post the 2012 season. We got the scouting staff together for Sporting Kansas City, and ironically, we did this around the combine. So on the way to the combine, and then during it, and then for the next several weeks, we did this study. And basically, we analyzed 5 years of the draft, where those players came from, and determined which players were successful. So you define what constitutes success: 2 or more years playing in MLS, except for kids drafted in 2012 can't have 2 years in MLS. Then it would be players who were, made the 18 or were on the roster. Then we ended up breaking the US down, because for the most part, the areas that don't have circles covering them did not yield a lot of players over that 5-year period. By breaking it down into these areas, it made it easier for us to say, how many players are coming out of each area. We then looked at things like success by round, when they were drafted. So what you might even say is you could use this metric to say success by age group and selection in the national team, or something like that. You would have like a couple parameters where you would say, okay, when we go out and we look, whatever country you're in, wherever you are in the world, and you give a rating and say, well, the players that we spent the most money on, or now in the case of the draft, for example, these are free transfers, which is why MLS clubs are still going to look at colleges. Why? Because, hey, there were 17 kids on Toronto and Seattle, roughly 25% of their rosters. were free transfers because they came out of college and they didn't cost anything. So no matter how much it keeps scaling and getting smaller, and no matter what how fraught with issues college soccer is, if you tell a club that wins the championship or competes for it 3 out of the last 4 years, Seattle or Toronto, and like one had 9 and the other one had 8 college players on them, players that were developed there at one point in their career or another. If that's a fact, then you're going to look in that market. So now once we're in that market, you're going to break it down. By round makes sense in a draft situation, but you could use a different metric. You could say, when we pull kids out of academies from the Premier League, they have this percentage of success. When we pull kids out of the championship, this percentage. When we pull kids out of League One, League Two, this percent. And you can rate that, so you can kind of place a value on how much money do we spend, comparatively, looking at League One players versus looking at championship players. And you might be a mid-table championship team. Your budget's going to still be in the 90th or 85th more percentile compared to the rest of the world. It sounds humble, and maybe you only have 7 or 8 scouts and only 4 of them or 3 of them are full-time. So you have to figure out where you're going to spend your time, where you're going to spend your money. Overall success by position. So if you're just picking by position at that time, midfielders and defenders were having more success percentage-wise. Over time, defenders, that group has grown. Remember, this cuts off at 2012 data, 2013 season. So what's happened is that's actually grown. More defenders, less midfielders, less forwards are making it out of the draft. Well, then you would have to do the same thing if it was a part of the world. If your clubs overseas, and your odds of finding a good goalkeeper, defender, fullback, wingback in the U.S., maybe not so much the wingback, but you're going to have less success with the creatives because there's just less of them that are of the highest level. Those are going to be your odds. But are you going to be able to find some wingers, some creatives? Yes. Especially German clubs are proving that. They're able to find and develop players on a numbers basis, and we're talking like roughly 200 kids went over to Europe in the last year, and you think, wow, that's a lot, but it's small compared to Brazil or Argentina. Okay, we're in the top 5, we're like 5th, but my point is there's actually an untapped aspect to this territory. And I believe that anywhere you look that is not heavily scouted, and I can honestly say that the Central Valley of California, even though you can go to an event and run into, Borussia Dortmund or Mönchengladbach scouts, Mexican club scouts, etc., you run into them, but there's plenty of events you go to where there are no scouts. And there aren't a lot of development academies in this space. So, you could throw Las Vegas into that. And so there's a value to actually coordinating or setting up a systematic approach to that territory. And that's just an example of a space that anybody who's been there, seen players, knows there's more in there than what we're pulling out. And that's what the goal of this type of data analysis is. So here's a success by round. If it's not round, you might say league or something like that. You might have a different parameter. Here's success by region. And again, this is 5 years of statistics that are giving you this data. And so the idea is you understand where to put how much time, energy, and effort you put in to find players in a given area, in a certain age group, coming from certain academies. Now, we got down to the point where we were saying how many players came out of not just regions, but particular teams. And so that now, if you're doing this for youth, it's not so much the teams, but where did the kid originally start playing? A recent look at the United States U20s March camp, there were 8 players who had originated in the Bay Area of San Francisco, and 3 or 4 of them had come through San Jose at one point or another. But these 8 players, 6 of them were in Europe. And so that's an example of analyzing the data and going, wait a minute, at a younger age, we stand a chance of being able to find a player that can translate over to Europe from this region. And that's the kind of drill down you want. So there's, these are regions, not when they say Chicago, that's not the city, it's the whole area around it, DC, and so on and so forth. So you conduct your analysis. That analysis is then going to help drive where you're going to put your funding, how you're going to set your budget. What is the bang for buck? If we go here, here, and here, we need a network. Now, there's the US. It's a pretty big territory to scout. But if you were just to break down any one part of it, then there comes all the logistics associated with that. Okay, territory, boundary, ages, league. So those are the scope is going to be shaped by your budget. You pretty much try to cover as much as and shaped by your budget and your analysis. Your analysis is going to tell you that it's worth spending the money to send a scout to a particular area or to acquire a scout who's already in that area. And then you can start building your team, which is going to be a blend of experienced seasoned scouts, somebody that's been with your organization a long time, or somebody that understands the methodology really well. He's kind of a guide for the staff. And then you have to develop your homegrowns. You have to have guys that are eager and willing to work, who may start off just being like bird dogs, but are then trained in the methodology of the club. You want the methodology of the scout staff to reflect the club. And there's lots of examples of what happens when they don't. But that was part of the reason I moved, for example, from New York Red Bulls at the time to Sporting Kansas City, because in 2011, New York was heavily reliant upon international players. Nothing wrong with that. They raised the level. They have, advanced training in their history. There's a lot of really good things about that. But at that time, New York was de-emphasizing not only the draft, which is logical and makes sense, but also de-emphasizing even their own academy and acquiring players that way and pushing them through. That is turned around completely. And New York has become heavily dependent upon an excellent academy network and system. And so now, the methodology that me and my scout staff do would fit them very well. But at the time, me and a couple of guys that were working there and guys that I was training and met through the teaching the course and everything like that, it made sense for us to go. I went first by myself to Kansas City, and then by 2012 we had 5 guys scouting in that group. You want to establish profiles, and the profiles have to be loose enough that they give some room for growth and adaptation. So for example, your best say center backs who can build out of the back and still defend well 1v1, it's not going to be surprising if they were midfielders or even forwards as youth players. And you have to understand that depending upon the age groups, you have to have some tactical flexibility built into your profiles that enable you to identify players who are not only good at executing what they're supposed to be doing in their position, but also show a proclivity or the decision-making ability that translates to a higher level. I'll get into the examples of players and how to project them. because it's kind of part of what you want to train your scouting network to do. Scouts don't make decisions, they supply data for decision makers, but they have to have an understanding of how decisions are made so that the data they supply is most effective. So you have to establish data collection and management so that your scouts are feeding a product that makes sense in terms of its effectiveness. So I'm just going to show you. Go ahead.
Matt, what when you talk about collecting data and being able to manage all the information, is it just using Excel spreadsheets or Google Docs, or is there a software that is used for that?
So having worked with multiple clubs and seen online services at the Soccer Syndicate, it has an account with the International Soccer Bank, and we have a data analyst who helps us with the back end, creating the products and essentially filtering or extracting the data sets that we want. So because what happens is you find out that any mass of data that you acquire has a value beyond just the players that are in the database. It can give you indications of where the players are coming from that are successful. So for example, we'll assign a rating to each player based upon not a subjective, oh, I saw him and I really like his left foot, but based on what level is he playing at right now. And so if we're evaluating kids who have made it in the Bundesliga and the EPL and et cetera, you know, we have a certain level of the first division, and you want to say, where are those kids coming from? We want to be able to pull that data quickly so that it helps us with our targeting. And so in this case, I'm going to show you an Excel spreadsheet because it's so easy to manipulate and be able to show you, you know, a detailed scouting report based. So there's a player from UC Davis. And here's a rating. Oh, sorry. I would hate this. Somebody knows this kid and it says not good enough for PDL, but it was an MLS PDL team that we were looking for players for. So it kind of, you know, we're rating them on a high standard. That player should project to a USL team in time if he's going to come into a high profile PDL team like Portland Timber under 23s or Vancouver Whitecap under 23s, who one time, the first time I ever saw Alphonso Davies was with the Vancouver U23s. And he did not look like a 14-year-old kid, by the way. So two things here of note. You're looking at a player over time, and that's in one season, and then you go to the spring, and there's thankfully a report on them in the spring, and then you can go back to prior seasons. This is actually a database that is cleared of all the seniors, and so it's like the starting point for 2018. 2018 is when we formed the Soccer Syndicate and went online. So this is actually 2017 data with all the seniors pulled out, if that makes sense. So this would normally be double its size with probably 3 times as many reports in it, because the seniors in this group would have the most reports, and especially the seniors that we were rating for the draft, etc. So this is only 300 players, and it's covering about 2-year period. And so what happens is by the end of the season, these juniors become seniors. We add another 200 to 300 players, and you're up to 600-700 before you know it. But then beyond that, you have these individual player reports. You establish your lists, underclass targets. These are guys that can come into your under 23 team, or in interesting cases, maybe they end up on a list for Generation Adidas, or you even convince them to leave college early and play for your USL team or play for your reserve side. You establish a draft board, and so this is and interestingly enough, you should see the top players that were drafted in the draft near the top of our ratings list. We didn't feel like there was a left right-footed left winger besides Brian Olowski that could make an MLS club. So there's no one on that list. It's not that we didn't do a lot of scouting. It's just nobody makes that. Now, the way Portland and Kansas City both worked, even if they were going to play a guy inverted, they want the left-footed guy on the left side and the right-footed guy on the right side. And then you can tell them later that Francis Atuahane loves to be on the left wing and come inside and get the ball on his right foot. But that's part of the analysis of the player. And so sometimes for these types of things, you have to make sure that it's clear, because it's like, well, every time we look at video, the Atuahane kid's on the left side. Yeah, that's what he likes, and that's what works. So you see how you can take the massive data and turn it into actionable groups of players. The green are underclassmen that would be essentially, and so Joao Moutinho is a great example. He's the first kid picked in the draft that year. Where do you play him? The team that drafted him saw him as a left back. We weren't sure he was athletic enough for that. We felt like he should be in a double pivot because he needs cover, but he's a very, very good footballer, just skinny and overwhelmed physically by his first year or two in MLS. Yeah, so you can see now the red was, oh, this kid's Chicago homegrown, but he had not signed with Chicago as of the end of December. So what happens in January and et cetera, does he eventually sign? But you're tracking all the players that you think could potentially, not fall through the cracks and not actually get picked up by that team. And we actually ended up as a result of our draft work, the Portland Timbers actually acquired a player from DC United, Eric Williamson, who we had scouted and recognized as being a player who was worth the value that they paid to get him. And it was our best draft pick that year. And it was based upon our scouting data. And we could compare him to what was available in the draft. And to trade up, they would have ended up spending more money. So we felt like that was a great acquisition based on our scouting data. See if I've got any more. Yeah, here's the depth chart when you're not looking at just the top players. When you start expanding it for the lower rounds, especially when you start looking at the green guys are all underclassmen. And so it's basically you pull out all the yellow and all the green that ends up in that Generation Adidas, underclassmen that turn pro. And there's your starting point for your fall of 2018, because this is what the board looks like, saying these are the best players in the country in a 4-3-3 based upon Portland Timber analytics, and based upon our scouting as a scout staff. And we would just multiple scouts overlapping and seeing these players with schedules that are coordinated in advance based upon what? Well, this is, like I said, this is after the 2017 season. This is the data we have, based upon our previous scouting. And then now we've got the start of our draft board or our depth chart going into the fall. And then by January 2019, we've assessed the best players, created a new set of seniors, that are draftable, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, talking about the draft, if we're talking about these are just players that are in your academy and they're at all age groups and you're just trying to rate them across, say, 4 years, you can do the same thing. And it can help you develop your depth, because you can say, well, right now, so-and-so, he's the third best player on his team, but it turns out he's the fourth best left-footed winger that we have. And so that we should think about whether we should develop him into a left back because we don't have enough depth there. So these kind of analytical tools where you're building off of these scouting reports can end up being very, very useful. There it is. So what starts off as a database that I would suggest anybody start using something in a, and then all these columns to the right, to the left are all columns that you would filter by. So you have the year group, you have, and that's projected to the next season for this bunch. And then you have, you know, if they're a defender, that's what line they're in. And then you have like a number, and that is corresponding to their position on the field. So left back, in that case, this is the right to left, where you have the right back is a 2 and the left back is a 5. Obviously, that's being done differently overseas and in the national team today. But at the time, that's what the Portland Timbers were doing. Okay, so now we jump back in. You get an idea of data collection, data management, and then data flow is another thing altogether. You have to train the staff. And training the staff, we just use a simple, you establish a training program. You need commitment from the scouts. You want to share methodology and periodization. So you want to have a copy of your team's game model. And then from that, you're going to take what their profiles are, and you can even turn subjective evaluations into data, because even without video, you can create a chart, and a chart where you might say, what are the attributes of the starting wingers, and you might assess them as a group rather than as individual players, and say, okay, here's how important athleticism is, you know, 4 on a scale to 5. Here's how important technique or technical ability is, and then you can and you build like 5 or 6 different points of this star, and the shape that comes from that can kind of build you a profile. I can show you an example of this, very possibly, but I don't want to get sidetracked right now. But the idea is that you have a subjective understanding as well as a no-kidding data analysis understanding of the starting team in a professional first division club. That data is available. You can take that and provide subjective rating targets for your youth players by saying, hey, our wide players are generally more athletic than they are technical. We certainly think it's very important to be technical. We're not de-emphasizing that, but we're saying those are the profiles that are successful for the first team. So we might want to look at athletic kids to develop at younger ages. And of course, develop means you're going to make them sharper technically, but you're giving them a better chance to survive in the system that you're playing in. So the scouting training program has to reflect the actual developmental model of the club. And so you start off with scouting methodology is going to teach you how to understand playing and development methodology. And then you can essentially draw from that to develop your own.
Hey, Matt, I got a question came in. I think it refers to the pass, or that when you're going through the data. It's from MLS Legend. It says, because I have a huge soft spot for underdogs, what are the percentage of players that prove you wrong, that you undervalued them and what they want to bring to the table? Secondly, how do you rate the intangibles, especially with the mental side of the game, how they deal with adversity, how they handle pressure, and how they handle excesses, etc.? Great question.
Wow, great question, multifaceted question. Scouting in U.S. soccer is very much the work of an underdog. To be blunt, because MLS owners have been able to sit down and buy talent above the level. Now, we're not talking about value of that talent and if they've misspent at times, just talking about the reality. They've been able to buy talent from South America and other places, Central America, that was more experienced and therefore ahead in development than kids here. As a domestic scout, I make several trips a year to Europe. I was fortunate enough to live in South America for a short period of times, and that left an indelible impression upon me, part of being in the Air Force years ago. And so I would say that underdog is what we're all about. So as we see the huge landscape of US soccer evolving, we've always been scouting NPL and ECNL games. We've always been looking outside the DA for the shining stars who have that little bit of something that makes them special. And for me personally, I have at one event found a player who was tremendously athletic, who had never really played the game until he was 12 or 13, which is late development, right? But he was so athletic and he loved the game. He was a Ghanaian lad, and his dad took him to Ghana and his dad took him to Europe. And the kid fell in love with the game. And literally when I brought him on a recruiting visit to the Portland Timbers, the whole time he was watching what teams were doing in Europe. And he had favorite teams, in Europe. And his life was consumed by it. And I showed him, early in a game, I pointed out some players that would play in the part of the field that he would play. And ironically, there were injuries in the game. And those players, it was Amobi Okugo and Lawrence Olam, both moved positions twice in the game. And I was trying to tell him how they would play differently in different parts of the field, and they did it right there in front. And it was a game that we won. We beat FC Dallas that night, and it was like they had decided to do the whole game for this young man. He is currently in a D1 college, and he's being developed by an exceptional coach. So he'll be a late bloomer, just like a lot of college kids. He'll probably play all 4 years in college, but I believe he'll be a first or second round draft pick. And 6-7 years from now, we'll be talking about, hey, this kid's born in America. He should be on the U.S., not Ghana. But anyway, interesting kid, interesting. He's an underdog because he didn't get into this. He did not get, I'm going to give away who he is. But he ended up, when Portland didn't take him, I helped him get into Sacramento Republic's academy, and they did a great job with him. They're very technical oriented, very tactically oriented, and so he's continued to develop. And then his college coach is just a special guy, anybody who knows him. And so I love underdogs. I think they're super important. And then the second part of the question, just refresh my memory real quick.
Yep, give me 1 second here.
I would say this. I do remember it had to do with developing the decision-making side. That's really what I want to do more than anything, is find players and put them in a tactical and technical situation that challenges them more than where they're at right now. And to do it, I need their coach where they're at to buy in. In other words, their coach right now has to drive that. It could be a 2 or 3 year process. I don't go and poach players and hold a middle finger, figuratively speaking, to the coach the kid has. Coaches are fantastic. They love their kids. They know the limitations of where they're at. And almost universally, when I go out and scout, the relationships I build with youth coaches are relationships that they can't wait for me to help a kid they've got go to a higher level and trial or get an opportunity to be looked at by a professional club. So that works hand in hand, and I'm always trying to up the ante when it comes to that intensity, that decision making, and that's the thing that separates us from Europe. If somebody asks me, what's the difference between when you go see Ajax or FC Yokohama playing in a tournament in Europe? By the way, I didn't go to Japan, but technically and tactically very sound, by the way. But seeing Basel, seeing Ajax at the younger age groups and saying, well, what's the difference between them and American kids? Well, there's the old cliches that we're physical and athletic and whatnot, but they have athletes too, and we have technical kids too. The difference is that they are able to emphasize decision making more regularly because the competition is better, and it's just a matter of continuing to dig in and support all of these leagues that are trying to get traction. ECNL has a 2-tier setup, and USL is going to have, in 2021, is going to have a fabulous setup. And all of these are pointing toward creating future pros. So they understand what the goal is, and now it's a matter of getting enough people together to support that and increase the level of competition and keep it, and that's why everybody's going to 2 tiers. The 1 tier is for developing players that'll be great in college and enjoy soccer and maybe even make it a lifelong passion and become a coach or what have you. And then the elite player who has a chance to play professionally. And when they make the jump between the two, and it happens, I like to be there. So I don't say just because you're coming from that lower tier that you're never going to be a pro. We've got to look there too.
Yeah. So I got a few more, but let's continue going on. Maybe we can, unless I don't know how much more you have here, Matt. We're creeping up on an hour, so I'll keep these questions for the end, and then we can keep going here.
Okay, very good. And so I want to wrap up this. This is a simple 4-week training program. I've got more in-depth 8-week and 12-week examples, but ultimately what you're trying to do is, all of you listening right now have the ability to observe a player, go to a game, and identify the talent. You all do. But what we have to do is then put something in writing that then translates as actionable data. And again, that's not like taking it all the way to the extreme and assigning numerical values to every sub attribute of the 4 pillars. I've done that. And it's helpful to a certain extent. But when you get to the point where you're writing, where there's 3,000-4,000 reports that are being written, sometimes the difference between the elite players and the players that need more work, we won't say that they'll never make it, we just say they need more work. Sometimes that difference is so apparent that it's really much easier to write short bullet statements about the player, but capture it and put it in context of what your team's looking for. And then when the part of the luxury of a company like the Soccer Syndicate is, I do a lot of pro bono work. I honestly, because I establish a relationship with a kid and his coaches or his family or whatever, and they don't find their way on day one to where they want. And then a little while later, I see the same player and he's improved in a given area. And the next thing you know, I make a phone call and the kid's on a trial and he impresses somebody. And that feels really good. I've had that happen a couple times with guys who were, weren't drafted and ended up making USL teams and impacting those teams. And so they were late bloomers and they still had things they needed to learn. They weren't as good, in college as when I saw them later. And so you're able to do that, continue to do that. Let's see, I want to go back up to this slide. Then you have to understand the talent ID scouting cycle. This could be a presentation all by itself, but what you're doing is you're always keeping an eye on the succession plan, and you have to understand the various pathways that the club has. You analyze those pathways. So if your club is getting a lot of talent from the international market, you have to understand, what percentage that is, and you have to be able to compare a player who's 21 years old, has played in Costa Rica for 4 years, has migrated from being in the 18 in his first 2 years to being a starter, and so he has 2 years of starting experience in the first division in Costa Rica. How does that relate to or compare to a 4-year college kid? Well, a 4-year college kid could be coming from UNC and he's already got, 6 years in the U.S. national team pool, and he's been in a lot of high-level competitions. So just because, and he wasn't a freshman or sophomore who left school early because he thought, I could take a $70,000 contract, MLS minimum, or I could stay in school and get my degree at UNC. And a lot of guys are going to take that path. Corey Baird matured tremendously as a person at Stanford under Jeremy Gunn. So you understand that the pathways are different. one kid comes to Salt Lake out of their academy, doesn't go to college, and is playing for the Real Monarchs at the age of 17. Another kid is Corey Baird. He goes to 4 years of college, and then he comes back and he's MLS Rookie of the Year. So not every pathway is going to handle every kid. You have to know all the different pathways so that when you're scouting in your lane, in your niche, you're going after players that make sense for the club, and you have an innate understanding. For a long time, the LA Galaxy, I don't know, a few years, understood that the odds were that Galaxy 2 was going to develop defenders, goalkeepers, fullbacks for the first team. And that the odds that a 10 or an 8 or a 9 or a 7 or 11 would come through were low, statistically speaking, across the league. So they're looking at the analytics. Teclosa comes there and sees a bunch of 8, 9s, and 10s in their academy and says, these guys are great. We should be geared for them. And so their model changes just based upon the change at the top. If the top doesn't feel like they can acquire those creative players from their academy, then trying to recruit academy players to that becomes kind of awkward. However, the Galaxy have pivoted. And now if you're a scout for the Galaxy, you go after that kid that shows good decision-making in tight spaces that translates to being an 8, 10, get on the ball a lot guy, you know, and so, or a false 9 or whatever it is that you kind of see him or project him as. And so that's why you have to review the methodology and review the profiles, review your data collection and management, and adjust on the fly. That's kind of the closure of that. And then I've got, which is good, we got to it within an hour. And then just some things I learned along the way. You have to establish a balance. You repeat the process and continue to shape the scouting to fit the team ethos and methodology. After building the profiles, building the interface between the club and the scout staff, understanding that both will evolve. And so scouting must adjust constantly as pathways for talent change, and then you shift and adapt. And normally I don't read slides to people, I know, but these are actually the talking points that I wanted to bring out to you, so they became a slide. You could obviously build 10 or 15 slides out of these bullet points, but I wanted to get this all out and then have the discussion with you guys. The club must leverage the scouts and be prepared to shift. There are times when you're going for not for profile, you're going for succession plan need, and then there's a player presented to you that is actually not a need for the club right now, but would he be a good acquisition for the future? And at each one of my stops, there was a player who fit that and did not fit what the club was looking for at that precise moment. And you look back and you go, wow, that player could have changed the team that I was at. And it's not, again, this is not a, how do I say this? It's not a critique or a criticism of these clubs, but it is part of the relationship between scouting and the club. And the club has to be able to kind of think outside the box. Now, one other thing I'll say is that Graham Zusi developed exceptionally well at Sporting KC. Chris Roldan developed incredibly well at Seattle, and Danny Leyva the same. Seattle's doing something right, by the way, folks. Recognizing talent, getting it, and developing it. Woo, those are massive things to say about a club from the outside. Tremendous respect for those people, for sure. And relationships I've had with Kurt Schmidt are relationships that make all this hard work really worthwhile. Kurt's now at Miami, but again, one of the guys who really I cut my teeth in scouting alongside this guy, competing with him, and and then, you know, they discovered Daniel largely after he was moving on to LA. But anyway, so that's, I could talk about each one of these players, but I think it's more important to go to your questions and kind of tell it.
Yep.
But I can tell you that the clubs needed different positions and went after those positions. So it wasn't like they never said, oh, those guys aren't good. They just didn't fit a need at that moment. And in all three cases, I believe that those players would have changed the team if they had gotten into it.
Great. Yeah, that was fascinating, Matt. We have a few questions here. The first one, how can those of us in Europe accurately evaluate college players? How can we project most effectively what they will do given that they play at such a low level? For example, Tristan Blackman played with 0 pro level players and maybe faced less than 10 pro level players in his 4 years in college.
Wait, who'd you say? Tristan Blackman?
Blackman, yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay. So I remember the first game that Tristan Blackman played at right back, and I had scouted Tristan as a forward. He was a 9 for them. Came in as a freshman, played freshman and sophomore year as a 9 for University of Pacific. Over the course of his career, I suggested early in his sophomore year that he would be a great right back. The team at Pacific. Now, one thing you would recognize, and I went to a lot of Pacific games, and they won 2 games their first season. They were a new program. So Tristan is a freshman entering a program that didn't exist the year before. So not only is he fighting college soccer and the Western, the WCC, West Coast Conference that he was in, not only did he face the uphill battle of I am a freshman on a team that didn't exist, so we're going to find our way, you know, slowly, ponderously, but he also faced, you know, being in a conference that is not quite as tough as some of the other conferences. I won't start naming names, but again, there was within 2-3 years, that conference had such a good season and such a good amount of players across the league that it really rated as the best conference on the West Coast for talent about 2 years ago. And that was just the number of talented players. You would have to look at the depth at St. Mary's, which has a lot of international players with academy experience overseas in pro clubs, Czech, New Zealand, etc. So there was talent there. There was talent at Portland being recruited by Nick Carlin-Voigt directly out of MLS academies, and so on and so forth. So we can break down each one of these teams in that conference and say there is some talent being brought in. So what's the key with a kid like that? So for me, the key was being on the ground and seeing him, because let me tell you, I was at Portland. I told them after the spring of his sophomore year, no, it was the spring before his junior year, I said, I think I found the best right fullback for the 2019 draft. So he still had 2 more seasons to play, 2017, 2018. So January 2019 would be when he would be drafted. And I said, I think I found their best right back. And I saw him play against Cal, Nick Lima, who's a right back and a right midfielder for the San Jose Earthquakes, been in the national team, was in the same game. And this kid absolutely took over the game. Blackman did. Range of passing, read of the game from deep, ability to swim by people, use his body, athletic, technical, could read the ball 60, 80 yards away and glide underneath it, didn't panic. Now, you watch the kid and his mannerisms, he seems nonchalant. He seems like he doesn't care. He's just very comfortable, very confident. Of course, he got shown up his first year at LAFC playing in MLS. He got beat up a little bit, but they've stuck with him, continued to train him. For me, I guess the key was seeing him develop over time. And that's something, so that's hard. Where are you going to see that on video? I'm going to say that the whole subject here is building a scouting network. You have to have scouts in this country on the ground. and then you've got a chance to find the next Tristan Blackman. You know, Jay DeMerit was a kid who was in the Chicago Academy system, got cut. Probably at the time, if you'd seen him play, you would have said, the kid's got some bite and heart, but he just isn't technical enough. He's just not good enough. And so Chicago let him go. The kid puts a little vagabond thing on his shoulder. He starts going around Europe. Next thing you know, he's playing in a friendly for some pub league team against Watford, and the rest is history. Somebody sees something in this beast that translates to a higher level. And even the U.S. men's national team did, you know, I saw him in 05 playing for Watford live. And that was, you know, that was a difference maker for me. But I'd been stationed in Italy, so I'd seen Nesta and Maldini, you know, I'd seen some of the best players at that position in the world, and I kind of understood what I was looking for. And I was like, I have no idea why Jay DeMerit, even playing for a championship level team at Watford, this was 2006, 5 and 6. Before he actually before they got promoted in 07 to the Premier League. I saw a kid in 05 that I thought, who's better than this guy at what he does? And all you have to do is watch a video, 2009 Confederations Cup against Spain. Jay DeMerit is a beast, definite player of the game. It's crazy. But how do you do that unless you see the kid live? And I wouldn't have said, Jay DeMerit's a national team player based on video. It would have been really hard to do that. All the analytics in the world, you know, you know how fast and furious the championship is. So I still think you have to go back to getting those eyes on, and then you see things that you know you can translate. When I was a first-year scout, I saw DC United play, no, second year scout. I saw DC United play Real Madrid. And what I focused on was the physical and technical and tactical matchups for Rodney Wallace, who was playing left back for DC. Rodney came out of college early, and so he was 19 years old, playing against Real Madrid. And I knew right then that I learned more in watching him play in that game than I did in the 2 years that he was in college. Playing on a very good Maryland team, by the way. He had Graham Zuzi, Omar Gonzalez, AJ De La Garza, Zach McMath, Casey Townsend. I just named a bunch of pros. Heck, I just named several national team players. That was all on a college team. And so if you know what you're looking for, you go to the right places. You can find the talent, but you got to have the eyes on the ground to do it. Video is super important because it fills gaps. And video analytics for the older ages and for the pro levels is essential because you can acquire so much data that translates to value. And so data and live scouting have to work together to so that you've got some of both influencing the final decisions. I hope
That's
that
great.
helps.
Yeah, that was a fantastic answer. Another one, for smaller clubs with academies in the United States, I'm assuming for instance, the old development academy or the new MLS academy club system. What are the main things on a budget that clubs need to create a network, a local network?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and I believe it can be done. And I think what you have to do is you have to make your system relatively simple. So I'm going to try to pull up a very simple spreadsheet and then just some very simple products that aren't quite as involved. Because if you've got a youth academy coach, so let's just say you're in the Bay Area and you say, well, yeah, one of the assistant coaches for the U17s at Juventus, said he'll keep an eye out for us for players that are coming through their system. Because if you're the SF Glens and you've got a pathway to Holstein Kiel and a potential professional trial for the kid, it might make sense to sit down with I'm not trying to put down Juventus. I could just say no names at all, but I'm just creating a scenario where you develop some scouts through contacts at teams that may be in the division lower than you, and they may see some kids coming up in the 13, 14 ranks that belong in your academy because they have the desire, the drive, and the technical skill to project to a higher level, and they want that challenge. So if the Glens are going to be playing in the MLS level at the U14 level, then looking at a 12-year-old kid at a neighboring but lower level, NPL level academy makes a ton of sense. But how do you do that? I think you have to have buy-in from the coaching staff of the lower level, but that's what I've done over the years. My bird dogs, this is a level outside the 25 scouts that are in the Soccer Syndicate. My bird dogs are important for me, and they're very consistent, because if they say to me, you know, I know you liked Johnny and Carlos. There's a new kid, he's a year younger, you know, Timmy, whatever his name is. You've got to see this kid. I know from what he told me about Johnny and Carlos, and the fact that I scouted Johnny and Carlos, and that I've rated them the same way I rate, you know, pro academy players or whatever, and gotten them trials at whatever academies. I know based on that Timmy's probably pretty damn good, right? And so then I go see Timmy. And so I think the same thing can happen. You can turn, and if I were to give a coach that I'm thinking of right now, if I were to give him a template and say, anytime you see a player, you know, there's a tab for each year group, you know, 04, 05, 06, 07, 08. Anytime you see a kid, put the name down, write down a few notes about what he, you know, his position and what he does that's special. And that's going to be fantastic. And then, so I was going to pull up something very, very simple like that. But I think you guys can visualize it. Like, we're not talking about 18 lines of data. We're talking about, well, here we go. I'm waiting for this to, I'm sorry, it's opening. I think it's opening. Come on. I don't know why it, okay, that's that. Oh, here we go. So here's a U20 pool, but look at what we got. Team name, team notes, date of birth, originating club. And you've got 3-4 players at each position, and this is the U20 pool for the United States. And it's just a simple thing that we'll pass out to all our scouts, so that when they get a chance to watch some U20 video, they can put some notes in there and get them to us. And then we can collate all those notes into one report on each one of those players, just as an example. And you can do the same thing with your, you know, your contacts at the lower level academies around, so that you build a list of the top players in that league right below you that's in your neighborhood. And I think that's valuable. Bird dogs are so important, and they're always interested in, you'll see what I've done here is I've put a little picture over the logo of the team that's being represented. But since you guys already heard that I was looking for, scouting for the Houston Dynamo, and you can see that that's orange, that these are players that were presented to the Dynamo. They are based on the circles represent, those are succession planning positions they want to find players for. We present them with, these are players that we've seen in those positions, and here are scouting reports on those players. Generally, this would be for an overseas team, because we wouldn't want to show what Houston's doing to somebody over here. So we'll just jump off that slide. And then here's when you drill down, you know, here's a quick look at like that database. And I happen to know what this slide is a picture of. Those are 17 players. There's 800 players in that particular database, and you can see how much writing there is on each player. So there was like 3,200 reports or something done on the players that were in the overarching 800 player database. And then the idea is you can then pull those reports and build a set of pillars on the player, and an overarching description of the player. And then you can also create these, you know, from that big database, you can create these views where you've got players that you can scout that are different age groups, or the same, all the same age group, whatever it is. depending on how you want to lay it out. And
Thanks,
then
Brian.
you present, this is the way you would present a player. Quincy Butler is at Hoffenheim right now, but he started out at Sacramento Republic. And so our data on him begins with the Sac Republic. And then you also cover the fact that even though he signed a pro contract in in August of 2017, he didn't play until July. So it was important to catch those U19 games that he played in, and he still played in a couple of U17 games because, hey, when they get in the playoffs, they want to kick ass. And he's been scoring. He's been doing well. Those statistics were actually in here, what he's done so far at Hoffenheim, but we pulled them because Hoffenheim was going to look at the slide, and we don't need to tell Hoffenheim about the kid since he's joined them. So that's another thing for you to learn. File this away. Don't talk too much about players that are in a team system. Jeff Agus did me a solid and said, Peter Vermees, Matt Martin recommended CJ Sapong and Graham Zuzi, 2 different drafts, recommended them to us with the highest regard, said that they were his top players. We didn't pick either one. We had a chance. We didn't. We should have. And what a hell of a thing to say to somebody if you're Jeff Agus. Probably got hired by Kansas City because of Jeff, because of Caleb Porter, because of Brian Weiss, because they were respected guys and they said good things about me. So if you help people and are good to them, they'll speak on your behalf and fantastic things happen.
Right. I got two more questions, just to be respectful of everyone's time. The first one is going to be a fantastic one. I can't wait to hear your response. Can you discuss your view on the future of solidarity compensation in the United States?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So my view is grow up U.S. soccer. We should be compensating the Crossfire for a DeAndre Yedlin. Now, how big is that? It doesn't make sense to break the bank just because one player makes it, because then you want to have a relationship to go both ways. And so you want it, like for example, the relationship between the Sounders and the Crossfire is probably pretty damn good because there's good people in both organizations. But at the time, that was a bone of contention. Casa Grande and Real Salt Lake used to have an incredible relationship together. And then there came a point where they split up and there was animosity. But if you ask the people running Casa Grande and you ask the people at Salt Lake, do you want to work with those guys? And if from purely of a kids getting a chance to be in a system maybe 1 year and then play with the Monarchs or go straight from Casa Grande to the Monarchs, well, then you want that relationship to work. How does it work? It works by the big clubs helping the clubs around them and figure out that they all have needs that don't cost millions of dollars, whether you're providing jerseys for their recreational team. It's free advertising. Why would you not throw uniforms on every stinking kid, every single kid you could? Get your badge, your patch on everyone, and you fund them in some way, shape, or form. Now, should there be a specific compensation for each player and the transaction? Well, yeah, there should be. But it should be in line with the economy of Major League Soccer, where as of yet, there's a steady flow of players, but the general situation is a lot of the players showing up in Europe cost next to nothing for the European clubs because they're coming in and they're getting relatively young players who have not developed in MLS yet. And every time you hear about an MLS player being discussed, there's a bunch of haggling because MLS wants to get a decent return on the dollar for their player, but there comes a point where you have to say what's best for the player. So for me, compensation for these smaller clubs, training compensation makes sense, and that's my opinion.
Great. Okay. Last one here, Matt. I really appreciate your time. This is it's intriguing. It's fascinating. Listen to you talk about the scouting networks and stuff. It's really cool. Actually, one person says, "How can we get involved with the Soccer Syndicate?"
Oh, okay. So at the website, there is a way. Well, look, I'll give you my email, and that's a good starting point. mmartin@thesoccersyndicate.com. And I'll be happy to get you started. There are training programs out there, and there's there's always a cost associated with those training programs. The Professional Football Scouts Association (PFSA) has a track. Sports Management Worldwide has a track. I can tell you that it's worthwhile coming into the Soccer Syndicate and being a part of an internship situation where you're providing data and helping us, and we're helping you. And then you have to put a cap on how long can you do that, how much time can you put in that. But we don't have like a minimum, meaning if you can do, I can go to one game every 2 weeks and I'll write whatever it is that, maybe we start you out and we want you to write a match report on a team. It's not easy, and therefore it's worth doing. But we can help you with the education side of it, and at a certain point you then become a compensated scout. And at this point, I'm going to be blunt, the majority of our scouts get expenses. They don't have a salary. We're 2 years into what we hope is around for 20 years, right? And I don't see it ending in 20 years. I see it getting bought out. And I'm not saying that's the plan. I'm just saying that there are teams in Europe that could walk up and make me an employee tomorrow. They could. Do they want to do that? Are they ready to do that? Not my concern right now. I've got to keep focused on what's, on the schedule I've got and the logistics I've got. So yes, mmartin@thesoccersyndicate.com. And we'll get started.
Very good. Very good. Well, Matt, I really appreciate it. This has been fantastic, and looking forward to continuing to talking to you and Scott as well about the Soccer Syndicate.
Oh, I really appreciate it. I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Mike, for putting this together. I'm going to be sitting in on all the other ones unless I get one of those phone calls that says, I've absolutely got to take this because of who's on the other end of the line. But otherwise, I can't wait to participate in the rest of these in terms of listening in and learning. Thank you for creating this learning opportunity. I'm not talking about me, although I learned something from all the questions, but also just the opportunity to listen to your other speakers. Fantastic idea, well executed.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Tomorrow we have Roy Carroll, who was the former goalkeeper for Northern Ireland, Manchester United, and Olympiacos, as well as being Danish Footballer of the Year. The next week we're learning from the academy, longtime academy coach and director of scouting, actually, for Athletic Bilbao. So those are two great ones that will be coming up. Thank you, guys. Hopefully I'll see everyone tomorrow. Talk soon.
Thank you, everybody.